Details of the Plex plan are starting to come to light, and if it's actually approved, it will dramatically change the potential housing landscape for all of Vancouver. And we're going to dedicate this episode to kind of doing a bit of a deep dive of these new announcements and kind of where the ink is starting to dry here, and kind of discuss like who could win from this plan, but ultimately also who could lose if this goes forward. And if you are considering purchasing or selling a property based on this potential outcome of the Plex plan, we'd love to talk to you about it because, again, we're still in the speculative, state here. And you want to definitely be careful, and you definitely want to understand all the details and potential outcomes on either side. So let's dive right into it here. Right off the top, the City of Vancouver here released an update to what they're calling the Multiplex Proposal just earlier this week, or last week rather, on May 18th. Now, the whole purpose of this, the whole idea here is it's a proposal to increase what they call the missing middle housing type. And that is ultimately everything between condos and detached homes. So it would include duplexes, triplexes, multiplexes, townhomes, row homes, and low-rise apartment buildings up to 6 stories. That's considered the middle, right? The condo is the low, I guess detached is the high in a sense. And then you've got in the middle here, all those housing types. So that's what they're trying to achieve, is find a way for the City of Vancouver and essentially the private sector to be able to build these type of homes to help with our current housing supply crisis.
Yeah, I tend to think that there is a missing middle housing type in Vancouver. So many clients of ours have said it. You know, you go from your condo and then you try and get into a townhome, and then from there you have to make a pretty big leap, either to a half duplex, or you have to go to a house, or you have to leave the city. And they're all difficult sort of decisions. So I think adding another middle layer here, much like if you were to go to England or something like that, you get row homes, or even in Toronto for that matter, you get row homes. So it would be nice to kind of see this improve, and I would love to see this take place. There was also a public meeting in February, and I kind of want to go over that because I think it kind of gives you some perspective in terms of where this policy might head. So there was 455 attendees, which is no joke. And 1,900 people completed the online survey. So bear with me here. 77% agree that multiplexes should be allowed in current low density areas. I think that's pretty overwhelming. 60% agreed to reduce the size of new houses, and 80% agreed to increase the size of laneway homes. With 74% agreeing to remove the guidelines, regulations, and reducing the number of RS zones. And that would come, in my opinion, that's greatly needed. There's way too many variations at this point for RS zones. But, I think when you look at the overall public meeting, it really seems positive in terms of moving forward with different multi-family options here for people in that middle housing sector.
Yeah, let's look at prices real quick here, because again, when we're talking about making that leap from, let's say, a condo to the next step up, which has kind of largely been detached, your average condo here in GVRD is about 750,000. And then you jump up to detached and it's 1.9 million. So it's people that are looking to get into that middle sort of section. Maybe you're a growing family, you've gone from maybe a single person to now you're married, maybe you've got 1 or 2 children, but 1.9 million is out of reach. Well, the average townhouse, which is essentially the missing middle here, comes in at just under 1.1. So going from 750 to 1.1 on average is a much more achievable leap than going from 750 up to 1.9. So that's kind of the purpose, part of the purpose of what it is to actually make something that is viable for people that are looking to make that type of change. Anyway, so more specifics, and this is where it gets really important to understand what is going to potentially be allowed to be built if this Plex plan goes forward. If you have a single family lot that has 33 feet of frontage, which is your typical Vancouver lot, you can build 4 units on that, is what they're proposing, in and around 4,000 square feet. For larger lots, up to 44 feet of frontage, sort of the next common size up, they're allowing 5 units in and around 5,000 square feet of buildable. And then those with the large lots, meaning 50 feet of frontage or more, they will allow 6 strata units, or get this, if you're going to help the rental community, you can build 8 rental units on that same lot. There is a minimum of 4 units that must be built on a lot of that size. And we're talking up to in and around 6,000 square feet of space. So again, they're trying to incentivize, in a sense, builders to build rental units. Because if you can build 6 or you can build 8, typically you're going to make more money building 8 on the sale. So again, this is what we've been needing to see for some time. Incentivize people to build housing. And this is a pretty dramatic step in that direction.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would also like to know, and maybe this will happen in further readings, if they're going to do 6 strata, for example, on a 50-foot frontage, and you're looking at, or 8 rentals. I wonder if, you can do a variable mix, sell 4 strata units and have 4 rentals. Be an interesting mix. I don't know how that would be received, but I know as a builder, they would love that option. With that being said, so looking at where these homes can actually be built, effectively, it's going to be any RS zoned lot, right? So it also has to have a lane or a double fronting. So a frontage of 33 feet or more. So you can't do this unless you've got a 33-foot frontage. They cannot be within a floodplain, and this is really most of East Van, some of the west side of Vancouver, around King Ed, and kind of south from there. So we're seeing some pockets that are being targeted here. And we'll see how it goes. Again, I don't know how quickly we'll see a 6-plex or an 8-plex in a Shaughnessy lot, but that being said, the east side is where a lot of people want to be, or a lot of younger families are emerging. So I can see why they want to target this neighborhood first.
And then when it comes to time frame, when can we actually expect this to go forth? Well, the next big step is the one sort of that just happened, being what they called the review and respond. So they've had the initial public feedback by holding an open format meeting here. Next comes summer of 2023, so just a couple months here, where we can expect to see what they call the council report. So they're going to go back to their offices, take all this feedback, maybe adjust some things. Then next big milestone here is in fall of this year, fall of 2023, where there is going to be another public hearing, and ultimately the council decision comes in that time frame as well. Unknown, or to be determined, is actually when new permits will be accepted. Right now, the time frame, I believe they're kind of envisioning January of 2024. Obviously, moving target here, but that's the current time frame. We've got at least 2 more hard-ish dates as far as seasonality goes, and then we can expect something much more finite by the end of this year, possibly early 2024.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable time frame to get the public's input on that as well. So, but jumping into again a few more specifics here, and maybe some of the reasons why this needs to happen. The whole part of this process is to simplify the RS zoning. So I know this could be a bit of a dry subject, but one of the biggest problems when it comes to redevelopment is there's currently 9 separate RS zones, which adds an incredible amount of complexity to any kind of change taking place. And I understand maybe historically why that was the case, but moving forward to deal with the density and the housing crisis that we have, these levels of complexity need to go away. And that's really sort of the idea behind this. The rules for duplexes and laneways are generally the same. However, the rules for houses are not. And some neighborhoods even have their own controls, their own design guidelines as well. So reducing some of that complexity, making it easier for city planners and people who are processing permits to move quicker by having a simpler set of guidelines, I think makes a lot of sense. But I'll also touch on something a little bit later in the episode where we're seeing the introduction of AI that's also going to solve this problem for other neighborhoods in BC.
So that's essentially the problem right now. It's just convoluted. It's tough. And if you've ever looked at zoning rules and laws right now, if you're trying to figure out what you can actually build, It's not very straightforward, and you're referencing all sorts of different pages, and these are often 150, 200 pages long, and you have to learn all about setbacks and other restrictions and whatnot. So again, they're just trying to simplify it, and again, make it more of a blanket zoning throughout, which would again simplify things. So they want standardized requirements, they want to eliminate all this complexity, and they want to combine all of the 9 different RS1 zonings here and turn it into just one, which again would I'm all for it. Off the top anyway, it seems to be the right direction. And they're essentially going to be doing this by they're going to provide like consistent building placement, meaning the height and size regulation for houses is going to be all the same, more or less, right? And so that'll be nice to be able to know what is essentially buildable on any lot that you're looking at. If you're a buyer or an owner looking to do something different with your land, they're going to apply simpler height and yard, aka the setback rules for the houses and duplexes, and so forth, and allow the same uses across all these zones, because some are allowed laneways and others aren't, and this, that, the other. What's interesting here too, though, is they're looking to reduce the size of new homes. And this is all done by, of course, the size of your lot. There's a percentage called the floor space ratio, where they say, okay, well, if you've got, 1 acre, you can build up to 70% of that size. Well, they're going to reduce that down to 0.6 or 60% FSR, floor space ratio. Interesting choice, but they're going to increase the size of new laneway houses, which is currently granted a 0.16 FSR. They want to increase that to a 0.25 FSR. So the actual houses will shrink a bit when we're talking about new builds, making room for a larger laneway, meaning you can accommodate more people on that same piece of land. So that's why they were looking to reduce the size of the main house, essentially.
So it's actually quite a bit bigger too. I mean, going from 0.16 to 0.25, it's nearly twice the size. So
it's significant. And if you pull up the plans, we'll leave a link here so you can actually look at the plans and whatnot of this these regulations and guides that they've submitted. You get a good idea of the vision of it. Now, again, we talked about who can benefit from this and who might get hurt. We definitely want to say this thing is still not set in stone, as they say. Not that anything really is with the city moving forward, but some of the key insiders here have let us know that essentially they're still looking at this as a pilot project. So even when it's quote unquote approved, it is currently believed that they're only going to let the first 100 applicants on a first come, first served basis get the chance to basically have their rezoned property and do something with it. That's 100. Okay. That's not very many. And of course, after that 100, if this actually does happen in this format, they may alter what happens after that point. So we're already seeing a bit of speculation, especially in our neighborhood in sort of Mount Pleasant in East Vancouver here, where single family lots for teardowns especially they're incredibly sought after right now, because a lot of builders think that if they just hold this for another 6 months, on the other side of that, they'll be able to build a 4-plex or 5-plex or whatever that lot size is that they're buying. And it's definitely not guaranteed. And it's going to be very hard to be that first 100 people in line. Let's be honest here. There's going to be a lineup out the door that day like it's a rock and roll concert. But hey, so let's be careful there, right? So don't just go out and think, hey, just because you own land that you're guaranteed to be able to build something bigger when and if this thing goes through. And then I think on the other side, if you were thinking of selling, maybe it makes a lot more sense to hold that property now, wait for this Plex plan to go through, because if it does, your lot, your detached single family home lot, may very well be worth more. Again, there's too much unknown at this time. But again, if you're considering either side of this, maybe give us a call. We'd happily talk it through with you, and especially for your specific scenario and the property that you're working with.
Dan, do you think it's enough?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say 100, it feels like a I don't know, a drop in the bucket for what we need here. And I'm just trying to, I'm purely speculating as to why that might be the case, but what do you think of only doing 100 units?
Again, that's why they're kind of calling it a pilot project. I don't know if that's a big enough like testing size to really give the feedback, but they seem to think so. And I guess it's a little bit maybe safer than going, okay, cool, it's a free for all. All of Vancouver's rezoned, have at her. We know what would happen at City Hall alone as far as the backlog there, which is already horrific. That would grind to a halt. And let's keep in mind too, if you're going to take a single family home, let's say 4 people live in that home right now. And then it can be rezoned into a fourplex, which maybe up to 12 people are now going to live in that same exact footprint. Well, let's talk about parking and cars and traffic and the infrastructure. Not everything is going to be set up for it in every area as well. So there's a whole bunch of potential issues on the other side of this if we densify almost too quickly. Even though this is what we want, there has to be some form of ramifications as well. So I think they're playing it cautious, which I think is pretty typical of City Hall here, because they don't want to make a big mistake. They don't know if this is the right path yet. So I don't know, 100 too big, too small. I'm not a city planner here. I can't really speak to that other than I think hopefully it gives us enough of a result to know if it's going to work or not. And again, hopefully it doesn't mean, okay, here's 100. Well, you still have to wait 2 years for your building permit. And we don't hear anything until 2026 about this.
Right. I also think, I know as well as you do that a lot of, especially in East Vancouver, a lot of East Vancouver infrastructure is old, very old. The water pipes still cast iron in many ways, in many places, and there's only so much, density so much more density, I guess, that these things can handle. Also, what is this going to do to trades? This would create quite a boom if I suppose, if they just let, everybody have at her, as you said. So that, and I also don't think that they have the city infrastructure to handle much more in terms of the permitting process and the applications that are already in place, plus another 100 here. It's probably going to take quite a bit of time for that to process. So I think they're starting to look at solutions, but I think the actual feasibility of it is probably still some years away. Not to mention future development costs and what that might entail as well, because we haven't really seen much about that either.
Also, too, it's almost like what happens when they, let's say, want to do a new bridge, right? Okay, bridges are typically a bottleneck here in GVRD, and yet they'll go and they'll design this new bridge and spend $500 million or whatever, and they add one lane. And of course, that one lane is great for 4 or 5 years, and all of a sudden, they're like, oh no, we got to think about a new bridge again. Is thinking about 4, 5, 6 units, is that just thinking too small? Should this Plex plan be for like 15, 20 units kind of thing? I mean, obviously, again, feasibility isn't really there for it, but you get the idea. They're trying to help, they're trying to bring more, but yet again, with the 1 to 2 million new people, 2 million people, coming into the country this year, this is like it's playing catch up all the time in a sense. And yes, it's in the right direction. And yes, it's a good idea, but is it thinking too small? Do they need to be thinking bigger and being able to find even quicker and larger ways to build housing here in an area that needs it desperately?
And maybe at what point are they going to realize that adding bike lanes to bridges is only going to congest traffic more? That's a whole nother conversation, though. With that being said, I wanted to touch on what Kelowna is doing here. So Kelowna actually applied to a provincial grant, the city of Kelowna, that is, for $350,000 to work with Microsoft to develop an AI chatbot that'll expedite their permit process. And I actually think this is quite brilliant, assuming that your development process is straightforward enough for this to work. So I'll go through some of the points here because I think it creates a very interesting solution that maybe a year ago or even 2 years ago just wasn't even on the radar. So what they're talking about here is an AI chatbot that could receive applications for construction and renovations and analyze them for compliance and also issue the permit for it. The bot will understand zoning bylaws, official community plans, lot particulars such as dimensions, setbacks. It'll even be able to assess building applications and issue permits for compliant projects, and even provide feedback and work with the applicant to address the areas of non-compliance. This is fascinating. It's basically like having a human being that knows everything the way it's supposed to go and educates you along the purpose or along the process immediately in real time, right? So for simple applications, the vision for this whole project is that a fully compliant application could have an instantaneous approval, which we're talking about saving, 18 months, which could dramatically shift the entire landscape if this actually takes place. And I even did a bit more research. There's even discussions going on right now about printing, 3D printing homes going forward, which I don't know how that's going to happen, but nevertheless, very interesting discussion taking place in terms of what technology is going to provide for solutions in the future. And this, we don't have to wait super long for this. This is already in development, and the city of Kelowna has said that they're going to launch this in the fall. And sort of some of the runoff benefits here, AI bots will save the staff 30 to 40% of their time going through the repetitive processes with people who maybe don't know, or this is their first time, right? And that'll allow the city to redeploy these people in more valuable areas. And lastly, this is why I think we need AI, because, our own mayor, Ken Sim, who made a pledge during his campaign that the permitting time would come down to 3 weeks. That was a year ago, and we still haven't seen much change here. And in fact, I don't think they can change that without something drastic like an immediate approval that AI could generate. So very interesting in terms of how this is progressing. Dan, I'll let you kind of talk in one sec. I just want to end with this one question because it's been bugging me throughout the whole podcast here. I guess what I'm asking here is, I don't necessarily, obviously we have a housing crisis. I guess what I'm wondering, when we look at the permitting process and we look at how long it takes for these things to change, is housing in BC the actual problem, or is it a symptom of a much bigger problem? And you don't have to answer that, but it's a question that I've been asking myself since I started doing some research into this. So anyhow, really interesting stuff, though.
Very much so, and well, very strong question, of course, and very open to hearing our viewers and listeners what they think. I'd love to hear some comments. And then also, too, I just want to backtrack a little bit on what you're talking about with the AI and talking about what essentially could be built on lots and helping people through that. I mean, right now, Ryan, if you had a client reach out to you and say, hey, I'm curious about this lot, it looks interesting, what can I build on that? How long does it take to get that exact answer?
It takes days, honestly. And that's assuming I sideline everything too, right?
Sure.
Because I have to go through a 200-page document, like you said. I have to figure out maybe the one of the 9 RS zones that I have to deal with, right? And then I have to make sure I'm dealing with the right one. So I have to then make sure I'm right. Whereas, AI, you could program this. So it could just be a sounding board, right? Which is incredible. And again, I don't think the process or the idea is to replace the city staff. This is AI helping expedite the whole process so that, human beings can go and do higher value work. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
I would use it today if it existed. That's for sure. Yeah. A lot of people would, it would be a huge information provider and really help people make even further educated decisions on what they were purchasing if they were looking to buy something or, of course, build something on their existing lot. Because
I think
while you may have even answered all the questions, okay, this is what the zoning says you can build, you still need to go to the city and get that approval. And there could be all sorts of variances and whatnot that still have to come into play. So yes, if you could have the AI essentially spit out what you want to build and agree on it and have it basically say its approval, sure, then you go get the city hall's second set of human eyes on it and get that level of approval. Either way, the timing would just be cut down to totally 100th of what it takes now.
The other thing that AI may provide, which is kind of interesting too, and I'm not going to get on here and suggest that our government's corrupt or anything like that, but any kind of abuse of power for someone who sits in a position of authority, for example, that can kind of be removed because, if you meet compliance and your permitting process gets instantaneously approved, then, you're not dealing with a second, plan checker or a third one when you've got, the first one who looked at it and all this convoluted process. And either it's an abuse of a position or neglect or just, someone who's new and doesn't understand, all of that can kind of go away. And that creates an enormous amount of efficiency and protection for, I think, homeowners, which I think is a great idea. So I'd love to see this thing take place. I think there's a lot of solutions that it could bring. And it's something that we should be embracing, not being terrified of.
I completely agree. So here we are. The Vancouver housing landscape may be very different in as little as 6-7 months here. So we're going to keep on top of this Plex plan, keep you well informed as it progresses. And please, as always, thanks for watching, for listening, and reach out to us if you have any questions. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Ciao.